tell us about your role, Breckon, with CrewMojo and at Deloitte.
Yeah, I've got a fantastic role. It's two hats that I wear simultaneously, one with CrewMojo as a board advisor, and the other hat that I wear is with Deloitte as the head of talent engagement, and we call it insights and solutions. So that's all parts of the employee experience and employee life cycle.
Right now, what we're seeing is many organisations facing a lot of movement in terms of talent in their businesses. And one of the questions we keep hearing is how can people or how can organisations retain their current talent in the current market without using extra dollars?
It's a good question. It's a big question, I would say. And reading a lot of headlines at the moment from thought leadership papers talking about the Great Resignation, which is not only in Australia but elsewhere. And my Deloitte colleagues, I think, might have actually coined that phrase in some of our thought leadership papers, which is good. But I think there's probably two ways to look at answering that question. You can look at it from an enterprise or a company lens and think about policies and think about practices and think about the structure and the culture and the values of an organization and how they play out to attract and retain people, especially at the moment, especially off the back of what's happened in the last couple of years with disruption from COVID and everything else. And then the other lens you can look at it from is probably more focusing the beam a little bit and zooming into the interplay between a coach and a team member, or the people manager and the individual members of their team. And so if I think about the enterprise options, one of the main ones that springs to mind is really just being very transparent and messaging trust, that the organisation trusts the individual, trusts them with any flexible working policies that the enterprise might have, which has become the norm at the moment. Hybrid working, forced to work from home, all of these sorts of things require a level of trust between the employer and the employee to work safely and productively. I think the other thing is strategies around continuous listening. So pulsing the organisation as a whole, listening to what people are saying and feeling frequently, and then being able to respond and act and maybe change things and do things differently so that the company can show that they hear and they empathise with the individuals and the situations that they're in. And then I think maybe there's some other things which are really around culture and branding and the initiatives that companies can provide to employees to make it, sometimes a fun place to work, because you can't really separate life and work anymore. It's all blended in together. And we used to talk about work-life balance, but really now it's more about work-life fit. And so I think having that concept of being able to fit all of those things in and treating people like people and not just as widgets or drones in organizations is probably one of the great ways that companies can engage and retain people. And then that sort of more micro lens that I described, this, zooming into the people leader and their team, I think there's probably also a couple of other things that have welled up that are really important at the moment. There's this onus on team leaders to galvanize teams and foster team cohesion in a kind of a forced virtual world in many instances. And some people have had that for a long time if their team is separated by geography or by different countries, but it's become even more important now that people leaders find ways to engage the individuals in their team virtually, but also bring them together to collaborate in different and productive ways. And having that sense of cohesion, I think, is always good. You think about like a sports team. If you've got a cohesive sports team that plays well together and has shared purpose and goals, then they're much more likely to stay together, and you're not going to find that one of those team members will pull the pin and leave, hopefully. And then I think the trust probably comes back into it as well. There is this concept that I think a lot of millennials and younger employees are looking for at the moment, and this is the freedom to do more intrapreneurialism. So, you know, that's to be able to work on lots of different things within the organization, and sometimes even create their own thing within the organization, but have that become something that is valuable for the enterprise, and for people to be given the space and the time to innovate and come up with that new stuff, and sort of be entrepreneurial from within the organization. And rather than have a side hustle, which is kind of like me working with you at Crew Mojo, but to have that sort of inside hustle. Right? I think that's an emerging strategy and a very effective strategy that seems to be engaging and retaining a lot of the kind of younger demographic in the workforce. And then probably just the last thing that I think, you know, comes right down to that coach and individual engagement is allowing individuals to be able to surface and talk about their personal purpose and the goals that they set for themselves in the workplace, to sort of reflect, you know, that sense of purposefulness and why they do what they do and why they do this job and like that job. And then the people leader to be able to say, okay, that's great, we're going to foster that in you, team member. And this is how that connects to the enterprise's objectives and the purpose and the values of the enterprise. And I think being able to articulate that connection between personal purpose and company vision and values is something that really helps to bring teams together, help individuals to feel focused and to perform and to achieve, and to stay and flourish and thrive, and not feel that temptation to look for those greener pastures elsewhere.
Awesome. So really, I'm hearing it's really not about the dollars at all. It's actually more about the ways people work together and extending trust, autonomy, and allowing people to exercise their creativity in their workplace, and to really bring their own interests to work from a purpose perspective, and make sure that that's aligned with where the organization is headed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good summary. And look, I totally agree. And I've experienced this as a reward professional for 20 years. It's not all about the money, the dollar money. And the concept of total reward only has pay as one small feature in that value proposition. And if you look at the research and, you know, the data from the exit interviews that are often cited as part of these thought leadership papers around the Great Resignation, leaving because of pay is not the primary driver for people to go somewhere else. It might be something that features, and yes, you have the opportunity to negotiate, get a bigger salary or a promotion or whatever when you leave a company, but it's not the primary driver. The primary drivers are about career opportunity and career advancement, and flexibility and the chance to do something new and different. And sometimes it's just about the recognition and wanting to have the recognition from a different employer of being able to advance and progress your career in a way in which perhaps you weren't able to.
Great, that's been awesome. Really enjoyed those tips, hints, advice, and even longer term underpinnings of a employee experience strategy. I'm sure our readers and viewers will thoroughly enjoy listening.
My pleasure, Mark. My pleasure.